Today we have a crazy wedding revenge story. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, ex-wife steals business, a revenge 3 years in the making. Participants: Abe is a young, talented veterinarian. Sophia is his now ex-wife from a very rich family. Yours truly is a humble software developer turned cybersecurity specialist 6 months ago. Backstory: it'll be a lot of context but skippable. Abe and Sophia both worked with my parents, who own a veterinarian clinic. Abe as a veterinarian, Sophia as an assistant. Abe is a bit of a pushover but a nice guy. Sophia is very manipulative, borderline just evil. Around 4 years ago, Sophia was caught stealing from the cash register and fired. She pushed Abe till he also quit around half a year later. They founded their own veterinary clinic 2 towns over, though much smaller, with Abe being the only doctor. While we all really hated Sophia, and my parents really were mad at Abe for defending her, I still liked Abe and wished him the best. I helped him set up a website and some other IT stuff that will come into play later. The story: so, 2 years after Sophia and Abe started up their own veterinary clinic, it was going well. Legally, Sophia and her family owned 49% of the company. Abe owned 46%, and another investor owned 5%. This other investor was supposedly neutral but turned out to be friends with Sophia's family. Sophia and the investor basically decided to freak Abe out of the business. I don't know exactly why, but having known Sophia for years, I am assuming Beelzebub warned her she's running low on her quota of ruining lives. Basically, they founded a new veterinary company and started selling the assets of the old company to it for basically no money. Since they had over 50% of the shares between Sophia and the other investor, they could do this. With this type of organization in my country, 51% control means you have the final say. They couldn't technically just fire Abe, but since they ran the original company into the ground, he was still out. He was the only doctor and did most of the work, and it turned out they had a non-compete clause that meant he couldn't start up a new business. And while he wasn't on the worst possible terms with my parents, the only other clinic in that area that wasn't just a single doctor and could hire him, it was enough of a bridge burned that he basically had no choice of working as a vet in this whole region. So Abe was left with no job, and all the money he invested into his company being effectively stolen. Oh, they also tried to freak me out of payment for making them some functionality for the clinic's website that let people reserve time slots and receive veterinarians' notes online, and also for setting up their company emails. The actual revenge. So Abe was crap out of luck, and I was out having a drink with him to cheer him up when the topic turned to who the new veterinarian would be to do the actual work. Not insinuating that vet assistants don't do actual work, Sophia specifically doesn't. She is afraid of dogs and won't hold them. Abe did all the management stuff on the website and ordering medical stuff, even the cleaning. We had no clue, but I was a tad pissed, both up and off, so I decided to check if they removed my access to all the IT stuff when we yelled at each other over payment. They didn't, and they didn't change the company email address's password either. We decided to snoop, which was technically barely not illegal since Abe was part of the company for like 2 more weeks at the time, and this was an overall company email, not Sophie's. We found 3 applicants, all of whom we immediately and very rudely rejected. Veterinary medicine is a small world in this country, so good luck with finding another doctor. The actual nuclear part, however, came 2 years later when Abe was already in the middle of a very long court battle. Since, as you can imagine, what Sophie and the investor did is not exactly 100% legal. I was cleaning up some stuff on my work laptop when I noticed they still didn't manage to remove my access to their system years later. See, we knew the clinic, the new company, was still going on, but they had a hard time finding veterinarians. Can't imagine why, and the ones they could get left quickly. As I poked around in their system, I saw that the veterinarian on the different case logs for weeks at a time was written as Sophie in the internal database. See, as it later came out, she was pretending she was an actual vet when there wasn't a real one employed for weeks, and even forged prescriptions. Now the thing is, me accessing this info is legally dubious at best. Sharing it with Abe would be even worse. In the last couple of years, however, I was studying cybersecurity to become an ethical hacker, and wouldn't you know it, dumb, never learned any cybersecurity me 2 years ago accidentally left in a vulnerability that a smart attacker could use to read data from the internal database. In layman's terms, you could inject input that would cause the database to send a request to any old server out there. containing this confidential data, such as a server an attacker owns. Just a couple days later, the leaked database showing Sophie's fraud ended up posted anonymously to a forum I happened to read. For legal reasons, it definitely wasn't me who posted it. I just happened to find it right after it was posted from a fresh account and archived it in the 15-minute window before the mods deleted it. I did send an email to Sophia when I first saw the issue in the code. I was worried me accessing the system would show up in logs and would be suspicious, saying I found a security flaw while going through my old code and to contact me about fixing it. I must have forgot she mainly uses the clinic's main address instead of the one that's like sophie@clinicsname.com, which she checks like once a month at best. How forgetful of me. When Abe's lawyer got the judge to order a full audit of these logs and the prescriptions, Sophie tried to delete the full database, failing to remember the backup it makes every week. I am not a lawyer, but I feel confident giving the advice that trying to delete evidence a judge ordered you to provide does not play well with courts. It strongly looks like she'll end up serving time. As a cherry on top, I helped Abe patch things up with my parents, and he got his old job back. He's been back for a year and just got a promotion and a raise. I'm currently sipping on some rum as I'm typing this that he bought me as thanks from his first bigger salary. Edit, I forgot to originally mention it but was reminded while I was replying to a comment. All the animals that Sophia treated are being followed up on by government officials. Abe had access to the logs because of the court case and looked it over as well, though he couldn't follow up with everyone personally. So far, it looks like she at least didn't harm any animals. She mainly just gave mandatory vaccinations, removed stitches, did drops and sprays against ticks and fleas, that sort of stuff. All perfectly within a practiced veterinary assistant skill set, still highly illegal. Honestly, I wouldn't even be surprised if somebody in Sophia's position would actually get off fairly easy if they did hand over all that information, try to act all ignorant, woe is me, I'm just trying to make it by. Like, maybe they would actually get some kind of sympathy points, but as soon as they go and try to delete the evidence, at that point, you're not really going to have to worry about character testimony. Voxbury commented, I believe this deletion she attempted would qualify as spoliation of evidence. While it doesn't carry jail time, the judge can impose consequences to include instructing the jury to assume anything not provided was damaging to the party who spoiled it. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is Revenge on a Hacker. One day, I get an email from a hosting provider telling me that attacks are being launched from our server and I need to look into it. I find that there is indeed a hacker in our server. He was using an app to anonymously control his bot network, among other things. I looked at the app he was using and discovered that it was an open source project. I then downloaded the code for this backdoor, modified it to log everything to a file, and replaced his app with my honeypot version. Over the next 6 months, I collected every scrap of information I could on this guy. I then used that information to take over many of his online accounts, including his main email account. That was the account where he had registered all of his services to, so I was able to issue password reset requests for everything he owned. I gained control of 6 other email accounts, 24 IRC accounts, his Facebook page, his dating profile, numerous websites, and the backup site he used for his cell phone. I have his phone number, his mom's number, and his girlfriend's number. I know his address, his birthday, the schools he went to, even his favorite foods and music. After I took every single online account he had ever had away from him, I sent a nasty email to his ISP in an effort to extort yet more information from them. In that email, I said some very unkind things about the monarch of Indonesia and how I might smear the monarch publicly if I didn't get the information. The hacker disappeared immediately after that. I've looked for him at times over the last 15 years since, and he's not resurfaced. The Indonesian lèse majesté laws regarding insults to the monarchy are not to be trifled with. The prison term for such an offense is 15 years. These kinds of hacks and the tools they use for these kinds of things, maybe they would work on like a mom and pop website that they want to steal the database from, users' logins and stuff. But I can't imagine you would want to be doing too much that might actually expose you to some kind of like cybersecurity division. Somebody that might at least have some kind of like training and expertise on how to essentially turn what you're doing around right back at you and point it directly at you. OP followed up commenting, I did in fact use the wrong words to describe the Indonesian law. Indonesia has a president, and there are severe penalties for defaming him. I do know for certain this hacker has not resurfaced yet, though I cannot prove this was the cause. The current Indonesian Criminal Code, KUHP, to be repealed 2nd of January 2026, criminalizes defamation of the President and Vice President of Indonesia, inherited directly from similar laws in the Netherlands. This was then inherited by the new KUHP to commence January 2nd, 2026, with threats of imprisonment from 18 to 54 months or a fine from 10 million rupiah to 200 million rupiah, roughly anywhere from 600 to 12,000 US dollars. Our next story is Revenge on an Animal Abuser. One day, I was on my evening walk with my dog, and we came across a small dog standing in the middle of the street shaking. Its hair was matted, had mange, ridden with fleas, one eye swollen and sealed shut with mucus, nails so long it was walking on the back of its paws, malnourished and quivering. I was shocked. I called my wife to bring me a blanket and come pick us up. While I was waiting, the door of the house in front of us opened and out came a disheveled-looking older man. He started calling for the dog to come inside. I absolutely lost it. I screamed at him asking if it was his dog, and he replied it was. I asked him why it was in such bad shape, and he said, "She's sick and won't eat." I yelled at him that there was no freaking way in the world I was letting him take her back inside. The shouting match lasted long enough for a few neighbors to come outside, who later told me he had another dog in the house. Eventually, my wife pulls up, and I wrap the doggo in the blanket and go home. I look up the name of our local no-kill shelter, but they were closed until the following day. My wife and I decided to call her Sally. I gave Sally a bath and went and bought some wet food since she wouldn't eat dry kibble. She devoured it. I set her up a nice sleeping area in the garage for her to spend the night. First thing in the morning, I took Sally to the shelter and called animal control and told them what happened. Then went to check her out, took a statement from me, and ended up at his house confiscating his other dog. Unfortunately, Sally was put down due to the horrible shape she was in. She was also very old. Here's where the revenge begins. This old jerk's house was on the route I took to walk my dog twice a day. My dog liked to take a dump about 2 houses before we reached his. Perfect. Now I didn't need to carry bags of crap all the way back to my house. I started tossing them on his roof twice a day. At first, he would climb a ladder around once a week to get them down, but eventually I broke his will to do that. This went on for about a year before I moved. His roof was covered in poop bags. I also printed out flyers with his address and pictures of how I found Sally and put them in all of the neighbors' mailboxes. I live across town now, but every couple of months I ride by and toss a bag of dog poop on his roof to let him know I'm still thinking about Sally. As somebody who is a major dog lover, this story just breaks my heart. I just adopted a dog from a no-kill shelter back in early December. They're literally sleeping on a bed right behind me right now. So the timing of everything is making me kind of picture my dog in a situation like that, and it's like, how can you ever allow it to get that bad? When it comes to dogs, the one thing I try to keep in mind is I was told at one point or another is to your dog, you are everything. Whatever you give them, whatever you do for them, that is their entire life. That is all they'll care about. That is all they'll ever understand. Like, how can people allow it to get that bad, especially selfishly if they say, oh, well, I don't really have the money. Like as if there aren't any kind of resources or ways to get help for that dog. Our next story is Thanksgiving Ruined, how I ruined Thanksgiving for my ex-wife and her family. When I first saw my ex-wife, I was in awe. She was so beautiful that it was almost unreal. I remember asking the friend I was with whether that was a real person. She was so lovely that she looked like a literal doll. At the time, I had just graduated college, but I came to the school campus to play basketball with some of my friends from college. It was a reunion of sorts, and we made it a yearly thing to come together every year and play. I was never a shy guy. I was a good-looking man myself, and my family had decent money. My dad owned a hotel he passed on to my mom after he died, and my sisters managed the hotel alongside our mom. I was also very popular in college, and I knew she would definitely have heard my name somewhere, so I walked up to her and introduced myself. We talked for a while, and then I went back to my boys. I didn't get her number because I didn't want to be too typical to ask for it, but I regretted that after she left. Since I knew her full name, I just went on Facebook, entered her name in the search engine, and found her. I texted her for weeks and got no response, so I just stopped. I didn't text her again until I saw her at the mall some months later. I saw her shopping with another person who looked like her. I knew that had to be her sister. I didn't walk up to her to say hello or anything, but again, her beauty struck me. I told myself that there were probably other men trying to get her attention and that I needed to try harder if I really wanted her. I even felt foolish for thinking she was just going to respond. I texted her again about seeing her at the mall, and this time she replied. I tried to ask her out, but she said she's just been out of a relationship and needed time. We stayed friends and texted often. After a while, she asked that we hang out, but I refused. It had to be a proper date. She gave in and I took her to dinner. Things went really fast with us. I was enthralled by her beauty, by how sweet she was, and she was an amazing cook too. After 2 years of being together, I proposed. I went to her parents, sought their permission to propose, and then I invited them, her sister, my mom, and sisters over for dinner at my house. I proposed just before dessert. It was beautiful. Shortly after we got engaged, I found out that my ex-wife cheated on me with her tutorial buddy. She told me herself because she didn't want to marry me knowing that she'd been lying to me. I forgave her because it happened only shortly after we started dating exclusively, and also because I loved her very much. I couldn't imagine a world without her. My ex-wife had a certain sweetness about her. Everyone loved her. My friends, my sisters, and even my mom, who didn't like any of my ex-girlfriends. She was a good host and a fantastic cook. She looked so innocent and had a naive air around her. No one could have ever believed that she could cheat. I convinced myself that it only happened because she didn't know better. I made up other excuses and hurriedly married her so I wouldn't get cold feet and back out at the last minute. After we got married, I saw a side to my ex-wife that I had never seen. She started to vehemently oppose us having kids. I was surprised because before we got married, she told me she was big on starting a family. She didn't just tell me, I knew from how lovingly she held my twin nephews when they were babies. On some days, my sister would bring her sons over to our home, and she would take very good care of them and tell me how she can't wait to have her own kids. Before we got married, we talked about the number of kids we wanted. I said I wanted 2, but she insisted on 3. She said that she just loved that number and that 2 kids seemed too few for her. We eventually agreed to have 2 kids first and see what happens. I also wanted us to wait before starting a family. I wanted her to myself for a while, so I suggested we wait for at most 5 years. Again, she refused. She wanted to start a family immediately. While that wasn't what I originally wanted, I was flattered about how eager she was to have kids and raise them with me. Now you understand why I was genuinely taken aback when my ex-wife told me she wasn't ready to have kids with me. After a year of being married, things started to really get weird between my ex-wife and I. She became very different from the woman I married. Something was just off, and obviously so. She was still the kind of woman who paid very special attention to her looks. She still cooked and hosted the best parties for me. My colleagues always looked forward to being at whatever party I was having because my ex-wife organized the most fun parties with the tastiest meals. Someone even joked about me getting promoted more frequently just so the office could have a party in my home. Despite all this, I didn't think my ex-wife loved me anymore. I even started to wonder if she even loved me at all. And then I began to wonder if my ex was cheating on me. As time passed, the feeling that she was stepping out became very strong. I blamed my insecurities, blamed myself for not forgiving her, and I told myself that the only reason I felt that way was because I hadn't moved on from her confession. I even convinced myself that the reason she became cold was because I became cold after her reaction, and she was only reacting to my coldness. Whenever the urge to stalk my ex-wife, go through her phone, or do something to prove my thoughts right or wrong came up, I would suppress it and tell myself to not be ridiculous. Despite how I felt, my logical and level-headed self always prevailed. One day, my level-headedness gave way to irrationality, and my imagination spiraled. I needed answers, so I stole her phone. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I took her phone when we went out together, and she thought it had been stolen by someone else, but it was in my car. To unlock her phone, I had to draw her security pattern. It wasn't that I knew it as her husband or anything, but I watched her draw that pattern numerous times, so I knew it. What I saw when I unlocked her phone shocked me. I found out from going through my ex-wife's texts that she was having an affair with her sister's fiancé. I was shocked. There were chats of the two of them making plans to leave me and her sister and then run away with each other. You know what was even more shocking? The fact that they'd both been seeing each other even before we got married. She was in love with him, yet I proposed and she accepted my proposal. She then went on to give me a lame confession about cheating on me at the start of our relationship. Their old chats had him begging her not to marry me and then scheming on how to announce their relationship to her sister. She even told him not to worry about me and said she was more interested in her sister not getting heartbroken. After we got married, their chats became more one-sided. It was mostly her begging him for forgiveness and promising to leave me soon. They had different fights. She accused him of proposing to her sister to get back at her for marrying me. He threatened to tell me about their affair, threatened to tell her parents, and threatened to tell her sister. It was a whole mess. Nobody could have ever suspected that my beautiful, seemingly naive, shy wife could be unfaithful in our marriage. If I told anyone that my marriage was suffering due to infidelity, they would automatically think I cheated. Even my mom and sisters made me promise not to hurt her. I found out about my ex-wife's infidelity 2 weeks after Halloween. Luckily for me, she got a gig to cater at a destination wedding and had to leave the country for a while. I was relieved because there was no way I could live with her knowing that she was cheating and not doing anything. I went to my immediate older sisters and told her and my eldest what I'd seen. Since I still had my ex's phone, I let them read the text by themselves. My sister made me print out the core parts of the texts that proved that they were having an affair, and I kept it at hers until Thanksgiving Day. Before Thanksgiving Day, I invited my ex's sister and her fiancé for dinner. I invited my mom and sisters and my ex's parents. I then told my ex that I'd invited all those people for Thanksgiving. She protested slightly and said she may be too tired to cook, but I told her I'd invited them already. Also, we always planned to have our own holiday tradition, and our families had never been at ours for dinner all at the same time since we got married. She agreed, and I sent out reminders. Just after she was done cooking and was about to start serving the meals, I had my sister go to her car to retrieve hard copies of the chats that I'd given to her. I then handed them over to all the members of her family. My sisters knew what was going on, but my mom didn't. She was shocked. Her parents were disappointed. Not only was she cheating on her husband, but she was also cheating with her sister's man. The man was so embarrassed, he left almost immediately when he caught on to what was going on. He just quietly walked out, got in his car, and drove out. Her sister was mad and slapped her twice. While the drama was still ongoing, I told everyone that I'd filed for a divorce and no longer wished to be married to my ex-wife. Her parents managed to pull her sister off of her, and they took the sister who was crying her eyes out with them. My ex-wife stayed back looking disheveled. At that moment, I realized how I was getting fooled all along. My ex-wife was very beautiful, and being human, my mind concluded that someone that beautiful was incapable of hurting another person. All through the process of the divorce, my ex kept trying to get back with me, but that ship had long sailed. I went from loving her wholeheartedly to being disgusted by her, to simply not caring about her at all. I don't regret my actions and will definitely do it again. I just wish I didn't take her back after her silly manipulative confession after we got engaged. I can only imagine that most of the people that hear this story are going to vary wildly in their interpretation of was OP right or was OP wrong in giving a second chance. When you're in a situation and a partner has confirmed to you they cheated on you, unless there's like some real, genuine circumstances for why they did that, such as you are a horrible person to them, then it's just not shocking. But besides that, should there be a route forward where you're actually still with them despite the fact that they admitted to your face they cheated on you? Our next story is, I gave my ex-fiancé an unforgettable wedding experience after years of manipulation. Having an overly attractive partner tends to hold more demerits than it holds merits, and in my case, I got to find out the demerits the hard way, courtesy of my dearest ex-fiancé. I, male 30, almost got married to my ex-fiancée Sandra, female 27, back when we both were in our early 20s. Our marriage was as a result of our being together in a supposedly loving relationship since we were both in high school. Now, my story with Sandra was one of pure deceit, manipulation, and a whole lot more. And the only reason she was able to get away with all of this was simply due to the fact that she was unnaturally beautiful. Let me take you back to where it all started. So Sandra and I went way back, like I said, and we had both known each other since we both were in high school. Now, for context, I'm not the most attractive person I know. I'll say that for a fact. I'll give myself a solid 4. Sandra, on the other hand, was a whole different case. If there was ever a scale, she quite literally broke it. And I wasn't the only one that felt this way back in high school. Everyone else felt like she was the standard to measure beauty. Even the ladies were comparing themselves with Sandra, and on a good day, she had the best of characters. She was kind, she was humble, she had the prettiest smile, but on a bad day, you don't want to mess with her. She could throw hands when she wanted to, and that was a fact. Now, Sandra and I first crossed paths when I was in my second year in high school. At the time, I had just gotten out of my introverted shell and I was experimenting with carrying out social interactions. Everyone knew me as that one kid that had little to no presence, and I truthfully wanted it to remain that way. However, I had a change of heart in my second year, as I felt like I was missing out on a lot at the time, and there was no better time to enjoy my youth than then. Surprisingly, the first friend I made back then was none other than Sandra, as she often came to me to get my notes after classes and stuff. We never really had a proper conversation, only greetings here and there. However, I guess this was all it took to make me actually see her in a different light. And by this, I mean, at the time, I realized that I was beginning to have feelings for her. More like a crush, if you will. Now, although she tried several times to engage me in a conversation, I just wasn't having it. I was always unconsciously turning it down. I would soon come to realize my mistakes, and I immediately sought to fix them. One day, when she came to me as usual, I told her that I was giving her my notes, only on the condition that she had lunch with me that day. My heart was beating real fast when I said that, and I was so scared of what her response might be. Thankfully, she seemed like she had been expecting that for quite some time, and so she gladly accepted. We had lunch that very day and we spoke at length to and about each other. It was really fun getting to know Sandra, and I got to find out some things I never could have if I didn't find the time to actually get to know her. Anyways, fast forward a bit, our relationship grew rapidly and rather quickly, I might add, from acquaintances to friends to best of friends, and ultimately to partners in a relationship. We got to the relationship part I think 3 months into getting to know her, and I can't lie, it was the best part of my life. We really understood each other, and I just felt lucky to have her with me, to be honest. Now, everything was all fine and good, and normally I wouldn't have been suspicious of how well things were going. I guess I unconsciously didn't want to jinx my luck, but it happened nonetheless. Now, at the time, we were spending a whole lot of time with each other, both during school hours and outside of school hours. I guess all of these were a bit too overwhelming for her, as she would soon start to request for some time apart. I usually thought that this was just her trying to take a breather and that I might be suffocating her, and so I always just let her be. My whole thought process would soon change when I came across a text from her Instagram at the time. It was a guy from our school, and they were both sending flirtatious messages and even pictures to and from one another. I confronted her about this, and she did what she knows how to do best. She gaslit me into thinking that actually checking out her phone without her permission was the bigger issue, and that I never should have done that. I had no defense at the time. I really felt like a bad person in that case, and so I decided to drop it. We didn't speak for a while, but we later resolved the issue, and I thought that would be the last of it. I thought wrong, as this exact same situation would happen no less than 10 times across the entire time I knew her. And each time, it gets progressively worse, and each time I foolishly forgave her, all because she made me realize that I could never do better than her. Fast forward a bit, post-high school, we were still together and I thought everything was fine and good, until one very particular incident where she cheated on me right in the comfort of our shared apartment at the time, right before my very eyes and also in our very room. I was devastated. I couldn't even react at the time as she immediately drove me out of the room. I was wondering what form of excuse she was going to be coming up with, and I waited patiently. When she came out with this guy, she simply sent him on his way and got mad at me. Apparently, according to her, I wasn't supposed to be home until late in the evening, and I returned home simply because I didn't trust her. And she also brought up the fact that I lied to her about how my day was going to be like. It was pure insanity. I didn't realize how someone could possibly concoct such devious words. I stormed out of our apartment and didn't respond to any form of contact from her for days. When I'd calmed down for a bit, I went back home and she was crying seriously. She felt remorseful of her actions and was willing to change. And seeing her in that state just broke my heart. I actually fell for it again and agreed to get back together with her. Now, I know what you might be thinking. I was a fool for still going back after all she did. Well, guess what? I realize that now, as I can never see myself going through such a thing ever again. Now, true to her words, she was honest and faithful. As far as I could tell, she had a whole turnaround in her character, and I was willing to take things to the next step. And so right after we graduated, I proposed, and she made me the happiest man by accepting my proposal. I made sure to go all out, as she just meant that much to me. Little did I know I was about to make the biggest mistake of my entire life. Fast forward to the both of us actually planning our wedding, I got to find out yet another bitter truth. And this was the fact that she had not only been cheating on me with my best and only friend, as she couldn't keep her hands to herself and her legs closed, but she had also been doing the same with every other male friend of hers and of mine. Basically, every other guy in both of our lives had been involved with the woman I was about to make the mother of my kids. Words cannot properly express how disappointed, annoyed, offended, and depressed I was. I took a whole month to myself under the guise of a work trip just to think about my life from that point moving forward. I thought long and hard as to what I was going to do, and ultimately I decided not to take things lying down and actually stand up for myself. But I didn't want her to just suffer a bit. I wanted her to regret ever meeting me. And to do this, I came up with somewhat of an ingenious plan. So firstly, I had to move our official wedding a lot because my plan required a whole lot of time. Secondly, I had to actually put myself out in the dating space, which was really hard considering I was doing this alone and also behind my ex-partner's back. And thirdly, I needed to pull this off flawlessly on my very first try. It was really hard because I'd never done something of the sorts before. However, seeing as the first step wasn't too hard and the third step only required a positive mind and determination, all that was left was the second step, which led me to meeting my lovely wife, Mai. Now, for context, Mai is a Malaysian. She had lived in Tokyo, Japan her whole life, and she only recently moved to start college here in the United States. We matched on Tinder and went out on a couple dates before actually getting into a relationship. I knew that she was the one I wanted when I felt her fill the emptiness that Sandra had created. Now, I know this may sound crazy, but I actually postponed my wedding with Sandra continuously for 3 years straight. Mind you, she was doing what she does best throughout this time, so it wasn't like she was lonely. It only gave me all the more time to spend with Mai. Now, when my relationship with Mai had gotten to a certain level, I proposed to her, and although she took some time before giving me a response, which was understandable, she said yes. Now, everything was set. I suggested the same date I picked with Mai to Sandra for our wedding, and she was most certainly relieved to hear that she was now getting married at last. Little did she know what I had in store for her. The days quickly went by, and in less than 3 months, the D-Day was upon us. On the eve of our wedding day, Sandra came to me and told me about all of her shenanigans. She basically said she wanted a clean slate for this new chapter of her life. I was simply disgusted by the way she came out about that, but I made sure that she didn't catch on with what I was planning. I just did what she always thought I would do. I forgave her. She was hoping the next day would be unforgettable in a good way. She thought wrong. As she walked down the aisle the next day, she was met with a different person on the altar, where she was supposed to be. She lost it right then and there. Who was this woman? Why was she trying to take this special day from her? What exactly was going on? I'm sure those were the questions that she had at the time. However, I didn't give her the opportunity to ask them, as I asked security at the venue to escort her out of the premises, while she was in her wedding dress. I never saw her after that day, and I also had to explain myself to Mai. Thankfully, she was understanding, but I know for a fact that Sandra's life would never remain the same after that day. So I just gotta say, although it wouldn't make sense for Sandra to clearly assume that OP would do something like this fake wedding bait and switch, if the guy you're with that you've been constantly cheating on and admitted to them that you're cheating on them is continuously postponing the wedding for 3 years, you must really have to think so little of them to go along with their plan and be like, oh yeah, sucker's just finally giving in and marrying me. Fun solo time over, time to strap it down. Let me just tell them about all the blatant cheating on them I did and get right to the honeymoon. Real kind of dreamy stuff. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.